100% inheritance tax. You, you commie bastard. You proper idiot. You are dumb as stupid. You rub. You don't have kids right. You've got wealth, which is relatively untaxed in this country, and it is hard to tax. I appreciate that. It can be harder by comparison to income. But you've got older generations which are sitting on big assets and unearned income from those assets, which are being taxed at a far lesser rate. So we saw, for example, when Rishi Sunak published his tax return, that his overall rate of tax, given so much of his income was being generated by wealth, by unearned income, we saw him paying a marginal tax rate which was far lower, in the 20 or 30%, far lower than people who have no assets, working every hour God sends, day after day after day, just to put food on the table, who are on much lower incomes. This is a big problem. Well, we've got some really interesting, reasonable responses here, John. So here we are. You're a sad little man. You're pathetic. You are a complete and absolute tit. You are a idiot, you lad. You're a complete clown. I hate you, you 100% inheritance tax. You, you commie bastard. You proper idiot. You are dumb as stupid. You rub. You don't have kids right. I feel sorry for your mum. You're a homosexual loser, communist. So, like, this is
only some of those were from me.
Yes, as I say, you took my eyes out. And only 50% were from Emily. Yeah. So anyway, some reasoned and insightful comments there, John.
Welcome to a slightly special Q&A edition of the Newsagents. You berated me last time when I said special, and you said, "Why is it special?"
Well, why is this one slightly special? We haven't done it yet.
Well, it might be. I'm hoping it will be.
Well, I'm hoping. It's nice to see you, by the way.
Nice to see you too.
Calvin
I've seen you all bloody week.
Calvin has sent, let's kick off with Calvin's question, who says, "Hi, newsagents. I love the podcast. I'm one of your listeners in the US. My girlfriend and I listen every day." Oh, thank you, Calvin. Coolidge, presumably. "My question is, one of the things that came out of the Zelensky visit to the White House was the worrying fact that Trump already has a gift shop with Trump 2028 merch. It made me wonder, do either of you have any prized or weird political merch?" I know what you're going to say.
So I'm going to be fair to Donald Trump for a moment, which I know is not much fun, but I'm going to anyway. I don't think there is a gift shop full of Trump caps in the West Wing of the White House. I think what he has is a sideboard full of the caps that he's collected over the years with Make America Great Again and Trump 28. So
Even that's quite weird. Sideboard.
That in itself is weird. I fully agree with that. Prize merch.
I know what you're going to say.
What am I going to say?
You show me your prize merch. And your shelf, your Obama stuff.
Yeah. There's some of that. But I have got, when Blair became Labour leader, and he was redrawing Clause 4, and I have got some sort of foolscap paper with his writing on it and crossings out when he left it on a train. I was on a train travelling with him, and there was all this stuff, and I thought, oh, that's quite interesting, actually.
What, he just left his notes?
Well, there were some notes that were left, and I've got some of those notes of when he was trying to reformulate Clause 4 of the Labour Party constitution. I thought you'd quite like that.
I do like that. So you want to stop following Blair around, taking his scraps with...
I've also got the demonise badge that the Tories produced in the 97 election.
New Labour,
campaign.
New Danger.
New Labour, New Danger. And it was sort of Tony Blair's with demon eyes. And I've got that badge still. But having moved around so much in the years, it's in a storage container somewhere in Staples Corner on the North Circular Road. And so God knows
Smart
where.
Sopel. Yeah. Political memorabilia Sopel. Big.
There's bits of a book of matches that were given on Air Force One when Ronald Reagan was president.
How'd you got that?
I don't
you
know
weren't
how.
there then.
I wasn't there then. And I've also got the M&M sweets from the Reagan era. And I don't know. Someone
next, you got some lemon sherbets from when FDR was there.
Exactly, completely. And so I just love the idea that they would give out books of matches.
Yeah.
On planes, because they're on Air Force One. You still got the old ashtrays in the seats from back in the day, because it's a really old aircraft when everyone would be chuffing around a cigarette.
I got for myself off eBay. Really treated myself about 6 months ago. I've got a map that's a constituency map of the UK from the 1964 general election, and it was designed. I think it was from The Guardian or the Times, I can't remember. It was designed so that you could watch election night, because it was the early days
And
of
start
television,
filling it in.
and filling it in. And so as a little treat to myself and my wife, Torna, but you can't wait for this, darling. At one point, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch it, and we're going to fill it in. And you know what, John? I can't wait.
So hang on, I just want to picture this romantic scene.
Yeah.
You're going to have a 1964.
No, it's
map
not romantic. No, she'll hate it.
Yeah, you're going to have a 1964 map on the wall. You are going to sit there with your little felt pens, red ones and
little stickers,
blue ones and yellow ones.
A few yellow ones, not many.
Few yellow ones, not many. I mean,
back then, not many at all.
Exactly. And you're gonna what a night that's gonna be.
What the long winter evenings, the nights are drawing in, John, and they're gonna fly by. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
And as you've probably gathered, it's Lewis after the 4-minute introduction. So Nelly has got a question, said, "Hi John and Lewis, long-term fan here. I'm very intrigued that you haven't discussed the distinct and some would say obvious possibility that Trump was bought by Putin many years ago and now is his best place agent, news agent. You only have to look at his decision-making, his body language near Putin, etc. to realise Putin has him. I'm nothing to do with journalism or politics, just a doctor, and this is my most obvious diagnosis."
And it is an obvious explanation of more or less everything. Look, I was at a thing the other day and there were some senior diplomats there with a lot of experience of Moscow and were discussing the same thing. Not in a jokey way, but is it possible? Is it possible that, Putin is Trump's kind of minder? And that
he was recruited years ago.
And he was recruited years ago.
Or he's got
And there
some
was a
compromise on him.
period in history where the Trump organization couldn't get backing from any of the US banks. The sort of Morgan Stanleys and all the rest of them wouldn't touch Donald Trump. And he ended up partly with a German bank, with Deutsche Bank, and partly with Russian banks. And there are some people who say that Russian money is what kept the Trump organization afloat for years, and that there is compromat on him. But I would say, if there were compromat on Trump, what would he be embarrassed by?
What would it be?
Yeah, what would it be that he'd say, oh, if this came out, I'm done. I mean,
He's gay.
A lot of stuff has come out about Donald Trump, and he hasn't been done. Everything that has come out that you have thought would kill him off, in a weird kind of way, has made him stronger and more bomb-proof.
He's a Democrat.
But he paid off Democrats as well during his time when he was, running the property business.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would be. I mean, it's all. Look, this has got a long pedigree, right? This goes back all the way to 2016 and what Trump calls is the hoax, the Russia hoax, and everything. And the reason I'm skeptical about it is because I think very often it's used, and it was used particularly the 2016 election, used by sort of more liberally minded progressive voters to come up with a reason why Trump is successful that isn't just that he's successful and that he's quite good at politics in his own kind of dark way. Because you just kind of it was a bit like with Brexit, you just sort of trying to find an explanation. This couldn't possibly have happened, so there must be a darker explanation for it. And I think that's just a very convenient ruse. It's a very convenient way of thinking, particularly for liberalism and for progressives, rather than just grappling with the realities. I think in this case, this would be a neat solution, and who knows, maybe there is something in it. I think it's more likely that Trump, he believes in so little, really. And he looks at, we've talked about it on the show before, I think one of the reasons he favours Russia is just because Russia's strong. He talks about it all the time. He basically has this political view, which is the weak suffer what they must. He says it again this week, Ukraine's a small country, Russia's a big country. That's the law of the jungle. Because that's the way that Trump's lived his entire life. That's his whole psychological makeup.
Kill
right?
or be killed.
Exactly. And he extends that to geopolitics, whereas most normal, a normal American president, quote unquote, would have more ideological sympathy with Ukraine and its plight, and Trump simply doesn't. So I think it's much more about that kind of way that Trump views politics rather than probably any kind of sort of deep historical relationship or compromat thing that it might be with Russia.
But I look, to Nelly's question, I do think, when you try to explain just how forgiving he is of Putin compared to other leaders who he's prepared to decry. I mean, in his first term, I always thought it was remarkable how much he seemed to love Putin and hate all the democratic leaders of the West. Couldn't stand Trudeau, seemed to tolerate Macron, but again, he found Macron a bit irritating as well. Couldn't stand Theresa May, couldn't stand Merkel. Vladimir Putin bloody loved him, and the joy that was on Donald Trump's face when he welcomed Putin to Anchorage only a week ago. It seems like it was bloody months ago already.
Well, he clearly admires him.
He admires him, and he wants to. He wants to be like him.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
He looks at Vladimir Putin and wishes he had that power and control at his disposal.
Yeah, and he also dislikes, or has historically in a way, disliked Zelensky, because Zelensky, and I've always thought this, it's largely because Zelensky rivals him for fame and for attention and for love, and Trump has to always be the main character on the stage, and Zelensky's possibly the only other major political figure in the world that I can think of, certainly in the democratic world, who actually does rival him in that respect. And I think he can't stand it. That's why he had to make Zelensky into a supplicant. It's why he had to force Zelensky to be so thankful and express his gratitude and change his clothes, because it was expressing, again, that there was a pecking order and Donald Trump was at the top of it. Interestingly, though, in terms of his relationship with Putin, I was speaking to someone the other day who had good insight into what went down at the White House the other day. And they were saying that Trump was expressing privately and saying to the leaders that he felt he had been too soft on Putin, that he was unhappy with the way that it was being portrayed, not least because he had gone on to watch Fox and he'd seen that there were just whispers, just hints, just of concern that Trump was being too soft on Putin. So I think there is clear sort of internal life to Trump, which is at least aware of the perception that he might be too soft on Putin. It was quite interesting yesterday that he tweeted kind of he put on Truth Social, he truthed kind of out of nowhere that it is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense, but it is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It's like that with Ukraine and Russia. And he said, crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden wouldn't let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? That would never happen if I were president. Zero chance. Interesting times ahead. Hinting
what?
Hinting that
he wants Ukraine to attack Russia.
Yeah, more weapons that Joe Biden would never have given. So again, his unpredictable nature and this worry that he has about perception and how he's being perceived, I think, is there. So who knows what might happen next.
I think Trump hates it when he gets a bad press.
Yeah.
And I think that if and there was it was hard not to think of anything else when he applauds Vladimir Putin getting off the plane, when he has literally rolled out a red carpet, when he rides with Putin in the back of the beast to go to wherever they're having their talks. You think, bloody hell. I mean, short of dropping to his knees and filleting Vladimir Putin, it would be hard to imagine what else Donald Trump could have done.
Emily goes away for 3 weeks and we're already talking about blowjobs with Vladimir Putin. It's not ideal, is it? It's not completely ideal.
Emily, come back. All is forgiven.
Yeah. She might not if she hears that. Right, we've got another question here on the same subject. We've got some other subjects coming up. We've just had a load of questions about Vladimir Putin and Zelensky and Trump, as you might imagine. Emma in Cheshire says, hi, I love the podcast. I've been listening almost daily since you started. Almost? Room for improvement, Emma in Cheshire. You've got me through many runs over the years. Question.
I read that when she sent that in as many run-ins, and I was thinking, God, I want to know what the run-ins were.
With the bank, the tax man. Question. May Trump suddenly be so focused on Putin and Zelensky again to keep the Epstein saga out of the media? A few weeks ago, it felt like he couldn't escape that story, and now everybody's looking elsewhere, and it's gone from the headlines. Knowing he has a history of distraction techniques, am I being too cynical?
Oh, Emma, I think maybe a touch. I mean, I think that, the Ukraine issue is huge. And the problem we've got in journalism is you need fresh logs to put on a fire to keep it burning brightly. And there was nothing that new that had come out. And so stories start to run their course. And you can't just keep a story going without something new to say. And it felt like, in the absence of, kind of documents being unsealed by the courts or whatever it happens to be, it was hard to see where the story was going to go. And, we had the moving of Ghislaine Maxwell from this from a normal prison to a very low security prison. We had the kind of meeting with the Attorney General, but what did we have after that? And then it feels like it will become a campaign by journalists just to keep it going without any new information. Unless you've got new information, it's hard. And of course, it would be pretty much a dereliction of duty if we'd said, oh yeah, I know Putin is meeting Trump in Anchorage, but we won't cover it. We'll focus on Epstein instead. I think that sometimes stories run their natural course. It doesn't mean that the story is over.
Also, I think that the timeline, the reason that Anchorage happened was because, Trump had set a long-standing deadline of getting to that Friday, and if there had been no progress, he said he was going to impose more sanctions. That's when Putin came up with the gambit of the Anchorage summit, and then it was successful because the sanctions went away. But that was a sort of long-standing thing that Trump had said. So I don't think it was a kind of... It may have had the effect of diffusing at least some of the Epstein energy in the Epstein story, but I don't think that they were necessarily connected. But I'm sure, Trump is a very masterful reader of the media, manipulator of the media, consumer of the media, and so I'm sure it won't have escaped his attention that that story has, for the time being at least, gone off the burner a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump can be a brilliant manipulator of the media, and he can also make things worse of his own accord, which keeps stories going.
Well, as you say, he's obsessed. He's obsessed more than any.
My favourite moment of his first term as president was when there had been this big leak of documents which showed that his daily diary, Monday this, Tuesday that, Wednesday that, and there were these big gaps between 11 and 3 o'clock each day, which was just marked as executive time, which meant that he went back to the residence and just watched Fox News. And so one of the TV presenters of a kind of less than flattering channel said, Donald Trump is the laziest president ever. And he tweeted 10 seconds later, I'm the most hard-working president ever. Proving what? That he'd been watching television at the time.
Yeah.
That's all, and so sometimes he just makes the point brilliantly that he's trying to see off.
Yeah, I mean, he said in that press conference, was the spray thing with Zelensky the other day, he was like, well, we're getting the worst press ever, but I don't care. Yeah. In which case, why have you noticed?
Why are you raising it?
Why are you raising it? And Annayia has sent a voice note in.
Hi, Lewis and John. Love the podcast. Love the banter, and helps me with my A-level politics as well. My question for you guys is, will the EU's willingness to suck up to Trump on the Ukraine-Russia issue strengthen their position in securing peace? Or will it only expose Europe's deeper problem of over-reliance on the US and its lack of readiness for possible future instability in the region? Thank you.
Annayia, thank you very much for being in touch. I hope have you just done your politics A-level, or are you doing your politics A-level next year?
Well, obviously, if she does very well, then we'll take the credit.
Absolutely.
If she does badly, then we'll say she should have listened harder.
Exactly. Completely. 100%. I don't know. I think that Europe is doing what it feels it has to do right now in terms of trying to manage this mercurial figure, Donald Trump. Does it make the EU stronger or weaker? I think it makes the EU stronger, or Europe stronger, because it's not just an EU issue the way that the talks are being done. I think it makes Europe stronger if it starts taking more responsibility itself for the security of its own continent and less reliant on America. Because if you're less reliant on America, that has to be a good thing, given how unpredictable Donald Trump is, and how one of his continual things has been that Europe hasn't paid its way on defence and is too heavily reliant on the United States. So if there is more of a gap between Europe and the US in terms of self-reliance, I think that's a bloody good thing.
Yeah, I think that the thing about Europe being having to suck up to Trump, I mean, that's just a reflection of the geopolitical reality as it is. Partly a historic one, which was we've relied on the Americans for security since the end of the Second World War. Partly one that was a mistake in not arresting it more. We've talked about it on the show before, not taking action earlier to try and create something that Emmanuel Macron calls strategic autonomy, the idea that the EU can act independently, or Europe can act independently of the US, particularly militarily. We knew that Trump could well be back. We knew that pretty much from the moment that he left office, and yet there was a complete complacency about the entire thing. But it's also a reflection of wider things as well, which have nothing to do with that. I mean, the truth is that Europe, and I include UK plus Europe, day after day and week after week and story after story, we are seeing Europe's irrelevance in geopolitical terms in all sorts of ways. Part of that is militarily. Part of it is economically. I mean, if you go back to, say, 2008, 2010, the EU plus UK, as it was, had an economy that was roughly the same size as the United States. In fact, it was slightly larger. I mean, today, the United States economy has run away from the European economy. Put UK, EU together, it's 30, 40% larger. The economy of the United... And then, of course, you've got the rising powers around the world. Technological China, what's happening in the Middle East, the Gulf, India, others as well. Technologically, economically advancing, galloping at a rapid rate. Europe, in all sorts of ways, technologically, in terms of its population, economically, militarily, feels more and more stagnant. And each individual country, often indebted, big population problems, demographic problems, often fractious politics, rise of populism, all sorts of different things. And a kind of lack of, if you're thinking about it continentally, a lack of obvious leadership. The EU is full of all sorts of problems. So I think that the truth is that right now Europe is a lagging continent. It's a continent which is diminishing in terms of overall global importance, reach and size. And I think that unless you were to have something quite profound happen, that is a trend that's probably only going to accelerate.
Well, I mean, look, you've got a fundamental structural problem, which is that Europe is made of sovereign nations.
Yeah.
And you've got a single currency, which means you've got a kind of single monetary policy, but each country goes its own way in fiscal policy, and different countries might need different things at different times. One country might be facing a problem with, a growing acceleration, whereas the other country needs something completely different. You have a United States of America with, a federal government in Washington. You do not have a United States of Europe. And realistically, to have the policies in place, and also a lot of what the European Commission has put in place, is too much regulation against an America where they're saying we're going to deregulate as much as possible, we're going to let companies grow, we're going to introduce tariffs to try and attract companies to set up in America. And I think Europe is struggling to compete.
Where's Europe's Apple? Where's Europe's Tesla? These things just don't exist, or the equivalent of Chinese. Instead, Europe is increasingly reliant on 20th century industries, which are
the Mittelschaft industries of Germany. Or whatever.
Exactly. And in some cases, and I don't think there are many Brexit benefits, but I think this is probably one of them. I mean, in some cases, are regulating new industries out of existence before they've even started, like on AI, for example. Britain's taking a different regulatory path, which I think is a good thing on AI in the main. So, some people are starting to talk about Europe as a museum continent. As a sort of place you go on holiday and it's nice and you can have a lovely, lovely time, but fundamentally a continent of the 20th century rather than the 21st. It's up to Europe to try and show that is not the case, but for the structural reasons you identified, John, Emmanuel Macron has talked about this for years and has got nowhere, partly because of the institutional problems with Europe.
Europe is aware of this. Mario Draghi produced a report, I think, last year, talking about the changes that need to happen within the European Union if it is to remain competitive, if it is to kind of stay up with and become a 21st century economy. It's whether there is the willingness of the member states who've all want to protect their own little bits of industry. French historically want to protect their farmers, and it goes on. Whether they will ever make the reforms necessary to be as lean and mean and competitive as America. Now, Frances Guinan.
She was a bartender in Star Trek The Next Generation. Played by Whoopi Goldberg, of course. The great Whoopi Goldberg.
Finished?
Oh, I just think we should pay homage to a great sci-fi character, John.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah. We've heard a lot about how Morgan McSweeney is a political mastermind. And based on Labour seats in the last election, you can argue that. However, the strategy seems to have been, let's say whatever we have to in order to win, which is fine until you're in power. Has he been overestimated by the media? Francis, thank you for that. I think it's a really interesting question. You do hear a lot of people now saying he was absolutely brilliant in terms of the campaign, how to win, what the strategies were, where the targeting of seats should be, and all the rest of it. And actually maybe not as agile now. And there have been unbelievable turf battles going on within Downing Street since Keir Starmer has taken office, and most notably with Sue Gray being forced out of Chief of Staff and Morgan McSweeney rising to that post. I still think that if you look at what's happening in the Downing Street operation, if you're focusing on Morgan McSweeney, or you're focusing on the Director of Comms, or you're focusing on the Head of Policy, you're focusing on the wrong person. The person who should be running Downing Street is the Prime Minister. And if you've got so much focus on, I don't know, this one or that one or someone else who is an official, I think you're looking in the wrong way. I think that ultimately these things, we were talking about the problems facing Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's apparent disinterest in some of the decisions being taken by the Treasury. No, it goes to Keir Starmer. He's at the top.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and look, I mean, obviously, the government faced a terrible inheritance, terrible structural things which are buffeting it all over the place, difficult geopolitical environment, and generally speaking, a deeply hostile media. No honeymoon enjoyed whatsoever, unusual for any government. But I mean, I think a lot of the government's problems, the seeds were sown, as they always are, actually before they entered government. And the truth is that there had been a shocking lack of thinking about how to provide a prescription for the diagnosis. The diagnosis was there. Keir Starmer, I sat when he was leader of the opposition, and speech after speech, conference speech, and others. They talked about Britain being broken. It was broken in every direction, economically, politically, culturally, whatever it happened to be. It was big talk on the diagnosis, but there was very, very little talk of prescription. I think there had been a shocking lack of thinking in the different departments, actually, in the different, not just from the centre, but overall, about what they would do when they actually got into government. As a result, a lot of that thinking has had to be done on the hoof in government, which is difficult. And you combine that with a political figure in Keir Starmer, who, although nimble, can be too nimble in the sense that he is a figure who, even many of those around him will quietly and privately say, is not exactly without politics, but he wears his politics extremely lightly and struggles to communicate whatever politics that he happens to have. And you put that together with the fact that he does not show, and if you talk to cabinet ministers, I was talking to someone a few days ago about this, if you talk to cabinet ministers, they will say, I am shocked at how little I hear from the Prime Minister. How little I hear from the centre. We're just let's get on with it, which is kind of nice in a sense. But it does lead, you compare that to John, I know, obviously you covered really closely, how hyperactive Blair was by comparison. Blair used to bring them in every 6 months for a kind of like little report card, and sort of say, this is your priorities for the year and whatever it happens to be. Very little of that by comparison in the sense. Now, some of that, I think, is obviously, look, Starmer's getting pulled, particularly on the foreign affairs front. But part of it, people will tell you is because, as we were sort of saying the other day, he has relatively little interest in economic policy. There are big parts of the government, because he came to politics late, that he does not have particular strong opinions about. And that lack of leadership from the centre and that lack of direction from the centre can be problematic.
Look, if you're looking for what happened in the campaign, and I completely agree with you that there was a lack of thinking about, what were the policy priorities? How are we going to do it? How are we going to reorganise the way government works so that we get what we want at the end of it? There seemed to be very little of that. But I think if you're looking in terms of the manifesto, did Labour need to promise not to raise VAT, income tax and employees' national insurance? I think Labour would have won the election without that pledge. But as a result of that pledge, they are so boxed in on what they can do in terms of tax policy. And given the scale of the deficit, and we talked about this the other day on the podcast, you can either borrow more, you can either cut public spending massively, or you can increase taxes. Those are the levers that you can pull. Sure, Labour said, no, you go for growth. Well, growth is not a tap that you can just easily turn on. It's not a sprinkler that suddenly is kind of irrigating your garden. It takes time to get that in the system. And so Labour are left with a whole bunch of unpalatable choices. And Lewis Goodall, I think you've weighed in this week, standing in for James O'Brien on LBC about what those choices could be. And I think we should go to the next question from Jimmy Buchanan.
So Jimmy has said, Lewis, I was listening to your show, I've been filling in for James O'Brien on LBC yesterday. How would you describe the response to your theory on 100% inheritance tax? So this is me.
Are you getting a lot of love?
Oh yeah, John. Well, I'm getting a lot of. Well, put it this way: So basically what I said was, and I was being a little bit provocative, but I said...
A little bit.
Well, only if you're loaded. But I said that specifically as well. I didn't think it was a particularly sort of like a revolutionary, it's not a revolutionary idea or communist idea, because what I was saying is I think we are getting to the point where we have way too much tax on labour, on work, on income, and so we should increase taxes on unearned income, i.e. through wealth and inheritance, which you've done nothing, in my view, to deserve. You've just been handed it by your parents or grandparents or whatever it happens to be. But in exchange, we decrease taxes on labour, on income, and so you actually keep more of your pocket, more of your wages at the end of the month that you're actually working for, and that would be an incentive to work. Anyway,
So
I
can
say this.
Can we have a flavour of some of the responses?
Let's have a
had
well,
this
some
brilliant idea, Lewis.
Well, we've got some really interesting, reasonable responses here, John. So here we are. You're a sad little man. You're pathetic. You are a complete and absolute tit. You are a idiot, you lad. You're a complete clown. I hate you, you 100% inheritance tax. You commie you proper idiot. You are dumb as stupid you rub. You don't have kids right. I feel sorry for your mum. You're a homosexual loser, communist. So, like, this is...
Only some of those were from me.
Yes. As I say, you took my eyes out. And only 50% were from Emily. Yeah, so anyway, some reasoned and insightful comments there, John.
It's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, do you think those are real people, or do you think
Yeah.
those are...
I started talking to a couple of them last night. I was like, what makes you say that? And of course, they go, oh, thanks so much for messaging me. One of them didn't. One said, don't you ever message me back again, you fanny. But apart from that...
I love the invective. They're great. I haven't heard that word being used in anger for a very long time.
Indeed. Well, honestly, I've had them all. Just, yeah, I mean, look, it is very interesting. And like, I thought... Because, as I say, obviously I was being a bit provocative, but the response online from the kind of online right, it reminded me a bit. I mean, we do keep poking the bear at the moment. You know, with what you and I were saying about London last week, it's like it creates this level of invective instead of just going, which I think most people, certainly what I do when I see something I disagree with, I just go, well, I disagree with that. I mean, that's ridiculous. Maybe I'll comment on it, but I'll do it in a sort of reasonable way. But there's something about the online discourse at the moment, and I think it's partly because the online right on Twitter and X have been so dominant for so long now on Musk, that something that is genuinely alternative and different, that doesn't fit within their worldview, even though, as I say, I don't think it's a left-wing idea, I think it's just an idea from classical liberalism, really, but anyway, it shakes them. There is this visceral response. It has to be a complete demolition. Part of that, I think, is about inheritance tax, and people feel it quite personally. But I think part of it is just about the sort of online media environment. As I say, we experienced last week. You and I deign to say that we don't think that London is basically downtown Kabul, and
it goes mad.
And it goes absolutely mad. It's fevered. It is fascinating.
I loved that you put it out there about the 100% inheritance tax, which obviously I completely disagree with. I think I think that it's the most natural instinct that if you have a family and you've got kids and you want to pass something on to your kids, that you've paid tax on the money you've earned, and this doesn't matter whether you're rich or you're poor. I mean, you know, very kind of ordinary families, they want to leave something for their kids so that maybe they can get a foot on the housing ladder or whatever it happens to be. I think it is the most natural thing in the world. And I think, again, I think that actually you raising it underlines kind of one of Rachel Reeves' great problems, that people feel so passionately about some of these issues that because she's operating at the margins of what you can do in terms of taxation, if you're not going to touch income tax, if you're not going to touch those, then you're grabbing the live rail, and you're going to upset a huge number of people.
By 2040, £200 billion a year is going to be bequeathed every single year, largely through property. And my contention is that a lot of that increase in asset prices is basically undeserved. It's windfall. No one's really done anything to deserve it. It's just as a matter of the housing market. But I would relate it back to that previous question anyway about Starmer and his problems, which is, look, I mean, that was obviously a provocative thing, but I think it does demonstrate, when I'm talking about like the kind of online world, I think in a way it sort of demonstrates his problems with what people say one of his big problems is his comms strategy. See, I don't think the Labour government's got a comms strategy problem. I think they've got a content strategy problem, which is that basically, whether we like it or not, old comms, i.e. getting journalists to write nicely about you or more favourably than otherwise, that's very 1990s, 2000s things. In the 2020s, you've got actually way more important than the comms strategy is the content strategy, because content is king. That's what gets people talking. That clip, I didn't intend to do this particularly, but that clip I think has been viewed 7 million times now of me calling for that in inheritance tax. It started a conversation about it. Admittedly, I might have to go into a witness protection program as a result of it, but that's okay. And actually it should be an advantage for a Labour government that struggles with the traditional media. You can shape the conversation if you do something innovative and interesting. When was the last time the Labour government did that? When was the last time, with all their army of comms officers and press officers and all of it, when was the last time they did that? Look at Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick hasn't had a comms strategy. He's had a content strategy, and he has been made king over the water as a result of it, because he understands how the modern algorithmic attention economy works. We might not like it, but that is the arena which politics plays out in.
Me and Fanny will be back in just a moment.
Hello newsagents, this is Sam from Aberdeen. I'm a big fan of the show, I listen every day, and you guys are the best news podcast out there. My question comes from something you talked about on Wednesday. John and Lewis were discussing weird taxes that the Chancellor might use to raise some money, and how unpopular these can be. Now, I'm a historian, so I didn't think of the poll tax. I actually went all the way back to the 17th century and thought about Charles I's ship money tax, and how that helped spark the civil wars. Now, I know this was before Lewis's time, but I was hoping that maybe, John, you could tell us about what it was like back then, and give your thoughts about what will Rachel Reeves' ship money be. Thank you, newsagents. Much love from the Venice of the North.
Thanks very much for that question. In the answer that Lewis had to inheritance tax proposals, why don't you just off?
We'll leave it there, shall we? We'll be back on Tuesday after the bank holiday. See you then. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.